poor single father helps a stranger repair her tractor. He doesn't know that she is a millionaire. A few days later, a black SUV pulls up to his house. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching this video. The morning light broke through the thin cracks in the trailer's blinds, washing the interior in a pale, yellowish hue that made everything look older, wearier. The floor creaked beneath Jacob Whitaker's boots as he stepped softly past his daughter's room, careful not to wake her just yet. He moved with the quiet rhythm of a man who had long ago surrendered to routine, not out of peace, but necessity. The air inside the trailer was cold, the kind of cold that settled into bones, not because of the weather outside, but because the heating hadn't worked properly for months. A space heater hummed near the wall, straining to do what it could, but Jacob knew better than to rely on things that weren't built to last. He set a pot of water to boil and leaned against the chipped counter, watching steam rise slowly. His hands were cracked, calloused, darkened with motor grease that never fully came off, no matter how much he scrubbed. His shoulders slumped slightly, weighed down not just by fatigue, but by years of holding a life together with little more than stubborn grit. He hadn't looked in a mirror in days, maybe weeks. He didn't need to. He knew what he'd see, lines that hadn't been there when Emily was still alive, eyes that had stopped hoping for miracles. When the water began to bubble, he dropped in 2 packets of instant oats and stirred them with a spoon that had lost its shine. He split the mixture between 2 bowls, added the last bit of brown sugar they had, and set one on the table for Haley. Then he walked to her room and knocked gently. "Haley, bug," he called softly, opening the door. She stirred beneath her blanket, a tangle of golden hair spilling across the pillow. Her eyes blinked open, blue like her mother's, but quieter, older than they should have been at 8. She didn't smile, but she sat up obediently, her thin frame wrapped in her worn flannel pajamas. "Breakfast's ready," he said. "Eat up before it gets cold." She nodded, rubbed her eyes, and followed him to the kitchen table. They ate in silence. Words had become rare in their mornings, not because they didn't love each other, but because mornings were a reminder of what wasn't there. Emily used to fill them with music, laughter, homemade pancakes. Now it was just oatmeal and quiet chewing. After breakfast, Jacob loaded her backpack, handed her the same peanut butter sandwich he packed every day, and walked her to the rusted pickup truck outside. The sun had finally pushed past the low clouds, casting a dull orange glow over the dry fields surrounding the trailer. Once lush and green, now the land looked as tired as the man who tended it. Weeds grew through the cracks in the driveway. The barn leaned slightly to the left, as if contemplating collapse. He dropped Haley off at the county school a few miles away. It was a small building with peeling paint and broken swings in the yard, but it had decent teachers, and it was safe. That was all he cared about. From there, he drove to the neighboring property where he'd been hired to repair a faulty irrigation line. The work was hard, the pay low, but he needed it. He always needed it. The John Deere 7810 tractor sat at the edge of his field when he got home, his only reliable piece of equipment. It was a machine that had seen better days, but had been kept running by sheer will and frequent sacrifices from the rest of the budget. By late afternoon, Jacob was back behind the wheel of his own tractor, hauling what little hay he'd managed to salvage before the last storm flattened part of the east field. Sweat clung to his neck, and dust coated everything: the cab, his clothes, his lungs. The Texas wind didn't help. It blew hot and dry, as if mocking the very idea of moisture. He didn't complain. He'd learned a long time ago that the land didn't owe you anything. You either worked with it or it ate you alive. It was on his way back to the trailer that he saw the machine, parked awkwardly off the side of the dirt road, hood up, steam rising. His first instinct was to keep driving. It wasn't uncommon for people to take side roads and get stuck or overheated, but something pulled at him, something more than just decency. He slowed, squinted through the dusty windshield, and saw a figure waving. Female. Mud on her jeans, a flannel shirt clinging to her soaked frame. She looked out of place, not in a helpless way, but in a way that didn't fit the landscape. Jacob pulled up alongside and rolled down the window. Her eyes met his, guarded but sharp. "Engine overheated," she said before he could ask. "Battery light came on just before it died." He cut the engine, grabbed his toolbox, and stepped into the dirt. The repair wasn't complicated. Clogged radiator, bad connection on the alternator cable. He worked efficiently, without comment. She stood beside him, arms folded, trying to hide her discomfort in the heat. He noticed her boots, expensive, though coated in grime. Her gloves, clean leather, the kind you didn't buy at feed stores. "Try it now," he said after 40 minutes of work. The engine turned over, then hummed. Relief flashed across her face. She offered to pay. He waved it off. "Just glad you didn't end up stuck out here overnight." There was a moment of silence between them. Something passed in her expression, a mixture of surprise and something softer. He didn't ask for her name. She didn't ask for his. He climbed back into his truck, waved once, and drove away. Back at the trailer, he found Haley reading under a blanket. He fixed them both some beans from a can, sprinkled salt, and made a quiet dinner of it. She talked about school, about a drawing she made, and about the way the teacher read stories in funny voices. Jacob listened, smiling when he could, laughing when it felt right. That night, as the wind howled outside and the roof creaked in protest, he lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. He wasn't thinking about the bills he couldn't pay or the part he needed for the combine harvester. He was thinking about the woman on the road, the way she hadn't flinched when her truck failed, the way she looked like she didn't belong in the dust. Something about her stayed with him, and though he'd never say it aloud, he hoped she made it home safe. Far away, in a sleek high-rise hotel room that overlooked acres of land she didn't trust yet, Alisa Williams stared at her phone. She'd taken a photo of the truck's dashboard to send to her assistant, but never got around to it. In the frame, just behind the reflection of her own face, she could see a faint imprint of the man who fixed her tractor. Just a blur, a shadow. And still, she couldn't stop looking at it. She zoomed in, trying to see something in his expression, something she hadn't seen in anyone in years. It wasn't pity, it wasn't calculation, it was nothing. And that, somehow, meant everything. She picked up the phone and dialed. When the line connected, she said only, "I want to know who he is." Then she set the phone down, turned off the lights, and stared out at the vast Texas night, wondering what kind of man turns a wrench with kindness and walks away without asking for anything in return. Alisa Williams didn't sleep well that night. The hotel room was quiet, the linens were expensive, and the climate control kept the air at a perfect 72 degrees. Still, something in her refused rest. She had taken off her boots, peeled away the muddy flannel shirt, and stood under a rainfall shower for 20 minutes, trying to rinse the dust of the road and the memory of that man out of her skin. It didn't work. His face, weathered, calm, and unreadable, kept floating to the surface of her thoughts like an unwanted song stuck on repeat. She sat at the edge of the bed in a white robe, her long legs crossed, hair wrapped in a towel and laptop open. She hadn't meant to dig deeper into the man who had helped her, but by the time midnight rolled past, she had already opened 3 browser tabs, reviewed county maps, and located property records for Hollow Creek. Old habits didn't die. They adapted. As CEO of one of the largest agricultural conglomerates in the Midwest, Alesa had learned early how to find answers quickly. She knew how to trace names, connect land parcels to ownership histories, and filter identities from tax records. She wasn't proud of using those skills tonight, but she justified it as curiosity, not control. The man hadn't asked for anything. That, more than anything else, had unsettled her. The report came the next morning, delivered by her assistant Logan via encrypted email. She opened it over coffee as sun rose behind her, casting gold across the sprawling ranch she had come to inspect. The land had belonged to her grandfather. She hadn't set foot here since the funeral. It had remained untouched, wild and unprofitable, until now. His name was Jacob Whitaker, 38, white male, widowed. Emily Whitaker, his wife, died in a car accident 8 years ago. One child, Haley Whitaker, age 8, enrolled in the county elementary school. Jacob had no criminal record, paid minimal taxes, no loans, no debts registered with banks. Survived on seasonal agricultural contracts and mechanical repairs, most of them off the books. Lived in a deteriorating trailer just outside Hollow Creek on 3.5 acres of dry farmland that had yielded almost nothing in the last 5 years. Alesa sat back in her chair and exhaled. The weight of the information sank into her like cold water. She imagined what it meant to raise a child alone, on land that gave nothing back, with no safety net but your own calloused hands. There were men in her world who built towers of glass and metal, who wore power like cologne, who quoted mergers and leveraged buyouts, but none of them would have pulled over for a stranger and spent 40 minutes on their knees in the mud without once mentioning payment. She stood and looked out the wide glass doors that opened onto the porch. The land stretched endlessly, unfenced, sunburnt, tired. Yet, something about its stubborn resilience mirrored what she imagined lived in Jacob's bones. She sipped her coffee slowly, the bitterness comforting. It had been a long time since she met someone who didn't see her as a ladder or a liability. By mid-morning, she was on her way back to the ranch, this time dressed differently. She wore old jeans she'd found in a forgotten drawer, boots with scuff marks, and a faded t-shirt from a college she didn't even attend. She pulled her hair into a ponytail and left the makeup behind. When she arrived, the tractor still sat near the barn. She had told Logan to bring over the malfunctioning seeder and an old cultivator that hadn't worked in years. She told herself it was to test the land. Deep down, she knew it was a way to bring Jacob back. She didn't have to wait long. A cloud of dust on the road signaled his approach. His truck rumbled up the drive and parked near the barn. He stepped out, toolbox in hand, eyes squinting at her like he was trying to place her again. "You're back," he said, more observation than greeting. She nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. "These machines don't fix themselves." He gave a faint smile, then got to work. She watched him from a distance at first, then inched closer over time, asking questions she already knew the answers to, not because she needed to learn, but because she wanted to hear the way he explained things, with precision, patience, and no pretense. They fell into an odd rhythm over the next few days. He came when she called, sometimes with Haley in tow. The little girl was shy at first, clinging to her father's leg, peeking from behind his jeans. Alesa didn't push. She offered juice, space, and quiet attention. Eventually, Haley opened up, showing Alesa her drawings: crayon dragons, flowers, a lopsided sun with too many rays. Alesa treasured them more than any painting in her high-rise condo. Jacob rarely spoke about himself. He answered questions when asked, but never volunteered stories. Alesa learned to read between silences. She noticed the way he hesitated before accepting food, the way he refused to sit until she did, the way he always kept one eye on Haley, even when he was elbow-deep in a gearbox. There was gentleness in him, guarded by layers of grit. One afternoon, after they had spent hours disassembling the cultivator's engine, Alesa sat beside him on the barn steps while Haley chased butterflies in the tall grass. The wind carried the smell of rust and wildflowers. Jacob wiped grease from his hands and stared out over the field. "Hard to believe this place used to grow anything," he said. "It still can," she replied. He glanced at her. "You planning on farming it yourself?" "Maybe," she said. "Maybe I just wanted to remember who I was before spreadsheets and shareholders." That surprised him. She could see it in the way his mouth shifted, unsure if he should laugh or nod. "I'm not who you think I am," she added. "I didn't think you were anyone," he said. "You needed help. That was all I saw." She looked away, throat tightening. It had been a long time since someone looked at her like that, like she was human and not a headline. Later that night, back at the hotel, she couldn't sleep again. Not because of noise, but because her mind was full. She thought about Jacob's hands, the way he bent over the tractor with focus, the way he watched his daughter like she was the only star left in his sky. She thought about what it would mean to build something on that land, not just a farm, but a future. She pulled out an old sketch pad and began drawing. She hadn't sketched in years, but the lines came back easily. A barn refurbished, a workshop, classrooms, gardens, a place where people could learn to work the land again, no matter how far they'd fallen. A place like the one her grandfather had once dreamed of. She wasn't sure why Jacob's face kept appearing in those sketches, but it did. The next morning, she called Logan. "I want to start a project," she said. "Another venture?" "No," she said. "A place. Something real. Something people can touch." "Where?" "Hollow Creek. The ranch." There was a pause on the line. "And who's the partner?" She hesitated, then answered, "Someone who doesn't even know he matters yet." As she hung up the phone, a strange feeling bloomed in her chest. It wasn't victory or strategy or control. It was quieter, older, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Hope. The days stretched long and slow across the Texas plains, golden light pouring over fields that seemed untouched by time. Alesa found herself waking earlier than usual, slipping out of the hotel and driving to the ranch before most people had finished their first cup of coffee. The land called to her in a way she hadn't expected, raw, imperfect, stubborn. She had spent her life orchestrating deals across continents, sitting at polished tables under artificial light. But here, in the cracked soil and rusted machinery, she felt something stir inside her, something that couldn't be measured in profit margins or shareholder reports. Jacob had begun showing up like clockwork, his truck rumbling up the drive just after sunrise. He never asked questions. If he found it strange that the woman he'd rescued by the roadside was now inviting him to repair half-forgotten machines in an abandoned barn, he didn't let it show. He brought tools, parts, and sometimes his daughter. Haley, though shy, had started to treat the ranch like a second home, drawing chalk dragons on the concrete floor, collecting wildflowers into dusty mason jars and chasing the chickens Elisa had brought in on a whim. Elisa made no mention of her wealth, her companies, or the fact that she could have hired a full crew to restore the place within a week. Instead, she worked beside him, hauling lumber, sanding old doors, learning to tell the difference between a Phillips and flathead screwdriver. She wasn't good at it, not yet, but she listened, and she didn't pretend to know more than she did. That, more than anything, seemed to earn Jacob's respect. They spoke in fragments, letting silence carry what words couldn't. She asked about tools, about soil, about water lines and weather patterns. He answered patiently, explaining how each component worked, why timing mattered, why sometimes you had to let a field rest instead of forcing a yield. There was a poetry to the way he described the land, not in verse, but in reverence. She began to see how much of him was buried in it, not just labor, but memory. Every dent in the barn door, every rusted hinge, every faded paint stroke held pieces of his past. She noticed the way he walked the property, how his eyes flicked toward the horizon with a kind of cautious longing. She wanted to ask what he saw out there, what ghosts haunted those acres, but she held her tongue. Instead, she invited him for dinner. It was a simple meal. She grilled chicken and corn on an old charcoal pit she'd found in the shed. Haley helped set the table, placing napkins with childlike precision, humming a tune Elisa didn't recognize. Jacob arrived in a clean shirt, still wrinkled, with his hair combed back and a cautious look in his eye. He didn't know how to be in this kind of space anymore, where food was shared without strings and people sat together just to enjoy the quiet. They ate outside under a string of bulbs she'd hung across the porch, light flickering against the encroaching dusk. Haley talked the most, recounting her day, her drawings, her dream of building a treehouse as big as a castle. Jacob watched her with soft eyes, pride and sadness wrestling behind his expression. Elisa poured him iced tea, and he accepted with a nod, as if slowly allowing himself the grace of kindness. When the meal ended and Haley fell asleep on a blanket beside them, wrapped in a throw Elisa had brought from the hotel, the air between them shifted, not dramatically, but with the gentle weight of something forming. "I don't understand what you're doing here," Jacob finally said, voice low. "I could ask the same of you," she replied. "I don't mean fixing tractors, I mean you, this place." Elisa looked out over the field, the moonlight casting silver over the grass. "It belonged to my grandfather. He farmed it for 40 years. My father sold most of the land after he died. I bought it back in pieces over time." Jacob nodded slowly. "So you're planning to build on it? Turn it into another business?" She shook her head. "Not like before. I want to try something different. Something better." He didn't press further, but she could feel the question swirling behind his eyes. In the days that followed, their work continued. They restored the barn's frame, cleared out debris, reinforced the foundation. Elisa hired no one else, though she could have. She wanted to do it with her hands, alongside someone who treated the land not as an asset, but as something living. One afternoon, as they stood in the heat, wiping sweat from their brows, Elisa handed him a folded sheet of paper. "It's a draft," she said, "an idea." He unfolded it. The sketch was rough, her penmanship hurried, but the plan was clear. A communal garage and repair center, open spaces for equipment workshops, a training program for young mechanics. All of it built on the old foundation of the barn. Jacob studied it for a long time. "You want to give free repairs?" for farmers, single parents, veterans, anyone trying to hold things together without help. He folded the paper again and handed it back. "I can't be part of that," he said. Alessa blinked. "Why not?" He looked away. "Because people don't do that unless they want something." "I don't want anything." He gave a bitter laugh. "Everyone wants something, even if they don't know it yet." Alessa felt a flicker of anger but smothered it. This wasn't about her. It was about him, about the walls he'd built to survive. "I thought maybe we could do it together," she said quietly. "Build something for others." Jacob didn't respond. He picked up his toolbox and walked back to his truck. She watched him go, unsure whether to follow or let him leave. That night, he didn't return. Haley asked about the chickens. Alessa said they were fine. She sat alone on the porch, the stars pressing down, wondering if she'd made a mistake. Maybe it was too much, too fast. Maybe kindness, to someone like Jacob, felt more dangerous than indifference. But she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The next morning, she drove into town. The diner was half full, a few men sipping coffee, talking weather. She felt their eyes on her as she passed, the way strangers always watched people they couldn't categorize. She ordered pancakes and coffee and sat alone, rereading the sketch Jacob had rejected. She didn't notice the older woman until she was already seated across from her. "You're the one out at Old Rose Ranch," the woman said. "I am." "People are talking." "I figured." The woman leaned forward. "Don't let it stop you. He was a good man, your grandfather. This town forgot that." Alessa blinked, unsure how to respond. The woman stood. "You want to do something good, don't ask permission. Just do it. The ones worth saving will find you." Alessa nodded slowly. Back at the ranch, she hung the sketch on the barn wall. She began marking measurements, making calls, sourcing salvaged materials. She didn't wait for Jacob, but every evening, just before dark, she found herself glancing toward the road, listening for the familiar rattle of an old pickup that didn't come. Not yet. The first whispers began in the feed store. It wasn't anything direct at first, just offhand remarks, the kind that skimmed across the surface of conversation like pebbles on a pond. "Heard she's setting up shop out there," said one man, adjusting his worn cap. "Big plans, big money. Strange who she's got helping her," added another. Jacob's name wasn't spoken outright, but everyone knew who they meant. In a place like Hollow Creek, it didn't take long for silence to turn into assumption, and assumption into poison. Jacob heard it in the way people looked at him at the gas station, how the cashier paused a beat too long before handing back his change. He heard it in the quiet that fell when he walked into the diner, the laughter that started up again as soon as he passed through. Even Haley noticed. At school, some of the kids had started teasing her, innocently at first, then sharper, meaner. "Your daddy's got a girlfriend," one boy had said, wrinkling his nose. "She's rich. Does he kiss her boots or just fix her tractors?" Another chimed in. Haley hadn't known how to respond. She came home quiet that day, more subdued than usual. When Jacob asked her about it over dinner, she just shrugged, poking at her mashed potatoes. "I don't want to go back tomorrow," she murmured. Jacob stared at her plate, then at the peeling wallpaper behind her, his jaw tight. He didn't blame her. He blamed himself. Alessa had kept her distance since the day he turned her down. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't drive by the trailer in that black SUV. But he knew the work continued. He'd heard from an old friend who passed the ranch that new lumber was being delivered. The barn was being reinforced, windows installed. He'd seen her name once in a local article, a vague piece about community revitalization. No mention of him, no photos. Still, it felt like exposure. He spent more and more time working the back acres of his land, trying to coax life out of soil that had long since quit trying. He fixed neighbors' lawnmowers, helped patch a roof, did what he could to keep the bills paid and the mind quiet. But quiet was a lie. The quiet was where the doubt lived. Maybe they were right, the voices in town. Maybe he had been a fool to think anything real could grow out of a roadside repair. Maybe all he had done was open himself to ridicule. He'd never wanted help, never asked for pity. And now, because of that moment of kindness, he was the subject of small-town cruelty. Then came the letter. It was taped to the barn door, scrawled in black marker on notebook paper. "Stay out. You don't belong. Crawl back to the gutter where you came from." Jacob stood staring at it for a long moment. The wind picked at the corners, fluttering it like a threat with wings. He tore it down, crumpled it, shoved it in his pocket just as Haley came out with a juice box. "What's that?" she asked. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Just trash." She squinted at him, unconvinced, but said nothing. She was learning, like he had, how to carry things quietly. It wasn't the first warning. A week later, he found 2 tires slashed on his truck. No one saw anything. No one said anything. But everyone in town suddenly seemed to have an opinion about the outsider woman and the man who couldn't keep his place. Elisa's assistant, Logan, was followed home one night after a town meeting. He didn't report it officially. No license plate, no proof. But the message was clear. People didn't like change. They especially didn't like when it came wrapped in wealth and skin they weren't used to. Jacob kept his head down, but he was unraveling. The more he tried to shield Haley, the more cracks formed in his own defenses. He was sleeping less, eating little, waking up from dreams where fire swallowed the ranch and he stood helpless, watching it burn. Then, one afternoon, as he walked Haley home from school, a black pickup slowed beside them. The windows rolled down. He knew the voices before he saw the faces. "Hey, grease monkey," one called. "Nice sugar mama you got. Must be sweet to get your hands on a platinum credit card and a warm bed." Haley flinched. Jacob didn't stop walking. He didn't say a word, but his hand curled into a fist so tight his knuckles turned white. The truck drove off with a burst of laughter and dust. At home, Haley climbed into bed early, too quiet. Jacob sat outside on the porch, the air heavy and still. The night seemed to listen. Elisa came the next day. She didn't arrive in the usual SUV. This time she drove herself in an old pickup she'd borrowed from the ranch caretaker. She parked at the bottom of Jacob's driveway and walked the rest of the way, boots crunching against gravel. He saw her from the porch and stood slowly, unsure whether to go inside or meet her halfway. She looked tired. Her face, usually composed and polished, carried lines he hadn't noticed before. Her eyes were softer now, stripped of armor. "Can we talk?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, but he didn't turn away either. They sat under the old oak tree that bent over the yard like a watching sentinel. Haley was at school. The wind was gentle, the light pale. "You've been through hell," she said. "So have I." He studied her. "You don't get followed home by cowards with spray paint." "No," she said, "but I get board meetings with men who think my credibility disappears when I show compassion." He frowned. "That article?" She nodded. "I had to let them think they were in control, that I was stepping back." He shook his head. "You vanished." "I was trying to protect the bigger picture." He stood, anger flashing in his voice. And was I not part of that picture? She rose too, her voice trembling. Of course you were. It didn't feel like it. I didn't want to drag you deeper. I'm already drowning, Alesa. Silence fell between them. Then, in the smallest voice he'd ever heard from her, she asked, What do you want, Jacob? He looked away, chest tight. I want to be enough, he said, without needing your money, without being your good deed. Her face fell. She opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded slowly. I'm sorry, she said. He didn't respond. He walked past her and into the house, closing the door softly behind him. A week passed. No texts, no calls. He didn't go back to the ranch. He fixed what he could around town, mowed a few lawns, worked in the garden with Haley. But even she noticed the change. Her drawings grew darker, less color, more clouds. One night, as the wind howled through the trailer's thin walls, she asked him, Are we going back to the place with the horses? He swallowed hard. Not right now, Bug. But he missed it. He missed the land. The sound of hammers echoing off the barn walls, the scent of soil and wood. He missed her. Not the CEO. The woman who learned how to replace a spark plug just to make him laugh. He missed the idea that something new might grow. He just didn't know how to ask for it back. Not yet. The air was still that morning, too still. Jacob noticed it as soon as he stepped out onto the porch. It wasn't the weather, though the sky hung low and heavy with clouds, but the silence, the way even the birds seemed hesitant to speak. The kind of silence that felt loaded, as though something had shifted in the dirt beneath his feet while he slept. Haley was inside, humming softly as she packed her school bag. She didn't ask again about the ranch. Jacob was grateful for that, though he felt the absence like a missing limb. She hadn't drawn horses in days. He poured himself coffee and stared down the road, half expecting to see dust rising in the distance, her truck pulling in, her face framed by apology. But it was empty, same as the last 6 mornings. The barn door still bore a faint mark where he'd scrubbed off the slur with steel wool and vinegar. The paint was gone, but he swore he could still see the outline of those words, like they'd sunk beneath the wood and made a home there. He hadn't told Alesa about the second note, the one that showed up folded neatly beneath his windshield wiper at the grocery store. We know who you are. We know what you think you deserve. You don't. He hadn't told Haley either. He just drove them home and locked the doors early, pretending not to check the locks twice before bed. The following morning, he rose before dawn and stepped outside to find the windows of his truck shattered. The glass glittered across the dirt like frost. He stared at it for a full minute, blinking against the burn in his eyes. Not rage, not yet. Something deeper, colder. The kind of sorrow that comes when you realize hate doesn't always wear a face. It can live in the silence, in the smirks of neighbors, in the footsteps that vanish before you can trace them. He called the sheriff. They came out, took photos, asked a few questions. He didn't mention Alesa, didn't say her name once. It was easier that way, safer. They didn't promise anything. It's probably kids, the deputy said, shrugging, boys being boys. Jacob didn't answer. He just swept the glass into a pan and dumped it into a bucket, the sound of the shards hitting plastic like rain. He patched the truck windows with cardboard and duct tape and went about his day. Haley asked why they couldn't take her to school in the usual way. He said they were walking because it was a good morning for it. She didn't argue. Later that afternoon, as they passed by the market on the way home, he felt the eyes again. People he'd known for years, now looking through him. Or worse, past him, as if he'd turned invisible. He heard one man mutter something about keeping to his own kind. Jacob didn't stop walking. Haley looked up at him, her small hand clutching his. "Why are people mean again?" she asked, voice quiet. He didn't have an answer. That night, after she was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table staring at the cracked formica, remembering Elisa's face the last time she was here, how her eyes had welled when he said he wanted to be enough. He hated the look it left on her. Not pity. Something else. Like she'd seen a version of him he wasn't ready to admit existed. Then came the article. It arrived like a punch to the ribs, headlines blazing across the county newspaper: Roe, Empire in Crisis, Billionaire Heir Under Fire for Lavish Spending on Mechanic Romance. There was a photo, not of them, but of the ranch, taken from a distance, the barn half finished. The tone was biting. Implications dripped from every paragraph. Inappropriate relationship, reckless image decisions, rumors of nepotism, misuse of corporate funds. They didn't name him, but they didn't have to. Everyone knew. When Haley brought the paper inside, folded under her math homework, Jacob nearly ripped it in half. But he didn't. He folded it slowly, placed it under the stack of unpaid bills, and went outside. The sun was setting. The air was thick. He walked to the barn that wasn't his anymore and stared at the place where his name had almost been carved into the future. Almost. He didn't sleep that night. The next day passed in a haze of silence. No work, no calls, no ranch. Then, in the early evening, her car came. No fanfare, no SUV. Just her, alone, in jeans and a plain white t-shirt, hair pulled back, eyes rimmed with fatigue. She looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of the last few weeks had pressed her inward. Jacob opened the door but didn't say anything. "I'm sorry," she said. He crossed his arms. "That's starting to sound rehearsed." "I know." He led her inside. She didn't sit. Neither did he. "I had to let them feel like they were in control," she explained. "The board, the media, they wanted distance. They wanted blood. And you gave it to them," he said flat. "I thought if I stepped back, I could protect it, protect you." He turned away. "I told you not to make me your project." "You're not a project." "No?" He spun back around. "Because it sure feels like I was something to be managed, positioned, just another PR strategy gone wrong." Her voice cracked. "You weren't." "Then why does it feel like you vanished the moment things got ugly?" She didn't speak. "And what about my daughter?" he asked, softer now. She was happy there. She smiled. "Do you know how rare that is?" Elisa stepped closer. "I didn't mean to hurt her." "But you did." She looked at the floor. "So what do you want from me?" He shook his head slowly. "I want to be enough, without your name, without your empire. I want to know that if I build something, it's because I earned it, not because someone felt sorry for me." She looked up at him, and in her eyes there was no pity, only heartbreak. "I never felt sorry for you," she whispered. "I admired you." He turned away, his throat tight. "I can't do this, Elisa, not like this." He didn't watch her leave. He just listened to the sound of her footsteps fading into gravel and silence. A full week passed. The ranch went quiet. No trucks, no movement, no calls. Haley asked again. "Are we going back to the farm?" He told her no. Not now. She didn't ask again. Jacob fixed what he could around the house, repaired an old sink, replaced a broken window, mowed the overgrown grass until there was nothing left to cut. He stopped answering calls, stopped looking at the road, but in the quiet, he began to ache for the thing he'd almost had. Not the garage, not the repairs, the purpose, The feeling of building something bigger than himself, of being seen not as broken but whole. He missed her too, the way she listened, the way she stood beside him without trying to fix him. He told himself he was better off this way. But it was a lie. And it was a lie he no longer believed. The knock came just after dusk when the sky was still purple but slipping fast into charcoal. Jacob sat at the kitchen table, a lukewarm mug of coffee in front of him, untouched for the better part of an hour. Haley was curled up on the couch, her head resting on a throw pillow with her arms tucked beneath her chin, a book balanced across her chest. The trailer creaked as wind pushed against it, and the smell of impending rain was thick in the air. When the knock sounded, Jacob didn't move right away. He'd stopped expecting anything good from unannounced visitors. It was always another bill, another form, another reminder that the world could take more than it gave. But the knock came again, firm, steady, and with the kind of patience that didn't belong to the sheriff or a neighbor. That's what pulled him to his feet. He opened the door, and there she was, soaked, no umbrella, no driver, no carefully tailored blazer or sleek boots, just Alesa, standing on his porch in jeans that clung to her legs from the rain, and a flannel shirt 3 sizes too big, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hair plastered to her face. She was holding a small wooden box in both hands, her knuckles pale from gripping it too tightly. He stared at her like she was a ghost. She didn't speak, not at first. She looked at him like someone who hadn't allowed herself to hope, but showed up anyway, and in her eyes he saw something that undid him more than the slurs, the whispers, the shattered glass. He saw vulnerability, real and unpolished. "I didn't come to fix anything with money," she said, her voice rough with cold or nerves, or both. "I came because I miss you." He didn't speak. He couldn't. "I miss you," she said again, softer this time as if the first time wasn't heard. "Not the way you work, not your hands, not what you gave me that night on the road. I miss you, Jacob." He looked down at the box she held. She followed his gaze and, with a breath, lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in dark green cloth, was a handmade wooden sign. Carved with care, the lettering curved and bold, it read, "Whitaker and Rowe Garage, family owned." He felt the air leave his lungs. "I dissolved the board," she said, "bought back my shares, lost a few investors. I don't care. I'd rather lose $1 billion than lose the one person who saw me when I wasn't wrapped in polish and branding. You gave me back my humanity. Let me give you the same." He shook his head slowly, more from disbelief than denial. "You really gave it all up?" She nodded. "Everything except my heart. That's still yours." And for the first time in weeks, months maybe, he didn't run from the emotion. He stepped forward and pulled her into him, rain and all, holding her like a man who had built walls so high he'd forgotten what warmth felt like. She melted into him without hesitation, her arms wrapping around his middle, her face pressed into his chest. It was a quiet, trembling kind of reunion. No declarations, no drama. Just 2 people who had finally stopped pretending they didn't need each other. Later that night, she stayed. Not because of the storm, though it had rolled in hard, drumming against the tin roof like a second heartbeat. She stayed because he asked her to, barely above a whisper, and she didn't need any more reason than that. They didn't talk much as the rain came down. Haley woke briefly, saw Alessa curled up in the armchair with a blanket and a cup of tea, and smiled sleepily before slipping back into her dreams. Jacob didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands, rough and cracked, as though they held the answer to everything. The trailer, for once, was quiet, not with the eerie stillness of loss, but with the peace of something found. The wind didn't rattle the walls like it used to. The rain didn't sound angry. It sounded like forgiveness. The next morning, he woke early. The storm had passed, but puddles shimmered across the yard, and the air smelled fresh in a way only rain could make it. Alesa was already up, barefoot in the kitchen, hair damp, wearing one of his old shirts over leggings. She handed him a cup of coffee without a word. He took it, and they drank in silence. "You were going to sneak out, weren't you?" she asked after a few minutes, still looking out the window. He didn't answer, but his mouth twitched with the hint of guilt. "I figured," she said, sipping. "Too late." "I don't belong here," he said quietly. "You belong wherever people respect what you fought through," she said, turning to him now, "and I think you've earned more respect than anyone I've ever met." He set the cup down. "I'm just a mechanic. I broke one. I've fixed junkers, scraped rent together with scrap metal, and raised my daughter on more fear than faith. I don't belong on a porch like this, next to someone who owns land that stretches farther than I can walk in a day." She stepped closer. "And I'm a billionaire who nearly froze to death alone because everyone in my world sees me as a number, not a person. That night, I wasn't Alesa Rowe, CEO. I was a woman with a broken truck, and you didn't ask for anything. You didn't treat me like I was fragile or powerful. You just helped." He looked down. "That's what you do for people." "No," she said, "that's what you do. I'm just learning how to do the same." He met her eyes, and in them saw no judgment, only something startling in its clarity. Respect. Real, unwavering, and without condition. "I'm not offering charity," she added. "I'm offering partnership." He blinked. "Partnership? I want to reopen my grandfather's old barn. Turn it into a real garage, community-centered, free vehicle repair for struggling farmers, single parents, veterans, anyone who needs it. I want to turn this place into something that gives back, but I can't do it alone." He stared at her, overwhelmed. "You want me to run it?" "Who else?" she said. "You know struggle, you know kindness, and you know machines better than anyone I've ever met." He laughed, but it wasn't bitter, just stunned. "You don't even know me," he said. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. "Then we'll learn together, and if we mess up, we'll fix it. Together." The following weeks unfolded like something out of a memory he didn't know he had. The barn was gutted, cleared, and rebuilt. New steel beams, reinforced flooring, electric lines rewired, hydraulic lifts installed. Jacob oversaw every inch of it, sleeves rolled, face smeared with oil and dust and sometimes joy. Haley started school in a new district closer to the ranch. She wore new shoes, packed a real lunchbox, and came home each day with stories instead of silence. She drew dragons again, bright ones. Alesa didn't stand back. She was there, every step. Sometimes sanding a door, sometimes holding a ladder. She brought lemonade in old mason jars and listened while Jacob told stories about engines, storms, and the first car he ever fixed with his dad. They grew close in the quietest ways. Not declarations, but presence. Not touch, but shared effort. He taught her how to change a tire. She taught him how to use a spreadsheet. They found a rhythm, a place neither had known they were missing. And yet, Jacob didn't let himself relax completely. He felt the shift coming, the way wind changes before a storm. He'd lived too long in uncertainty not to feel it in his bones, but for now, for this brief stretch of days, he let himself believe. Let himself be loved. Let himself belong. The grand opening had been quiet by design. No banners, no press releases, no ribbon cut with golden scissors. Just a wooden sign hung over the wide double doors of the refurbished barn, swinging gently in the breeze. Whitaker and Rowe Garage, family owned. Below it, a hand-painted phrase read, "Built on kindness." The words weren't poetic, but they were real, and in Jacob's eyes, real had become sacred. The first customers were hesitant. A man with a busted axle who offered $20 he didn't have to spare. A young mother with a coffin engine and 2 toddlers in the back seat, eyes wide with exhaustion. An elderly veteran whose transmission slipped every other gear. They all came with caution, shoulders tight, ready for a lecture or a bill they couldn't pay. But instead, they were met with grease-stained hands, genuine nods, and warm coffee in paper cups. Jacob worked with his head down and his heart open. He didn't ask questions that weren't necessary, and he never looked at anyone like they were broken just because their vehicle was. He fixed what could be fixed and explained what couldn't in plain language, never condescending, never cold. His reputation grew not by advertising, but by the way people felt walking out of that barn, less alone. Haley had a corner of the shop for herself, a little nook with beanbags, books, and a table where she painted signs and drew cartoons of cars with eyes and wings. She helped in small ways, handing over wrenches, wiping down counters, bringing lemonade. Every visitor knew her name, and she knew theirs. She had bloomed in that space like a wildflower finally given enough light. Alisa was everywhere and nowhere. She moved through the barn with the grace of someone who belonged, but never tried to lead where she needed to follow. She handled the back end, permits, supplies, donations, but she never used those tasks as a shield from the real work. She swept floors, stained wood, planted flowers along the entrance path. She never asked Jacob to be anyone other than himself. That, more than anything, earned his trust back in layers. They didn't talk about the future in absolutes. They didn't plan out 5-year trajectories or draw up visions on whiteboards. Instead, they let the days build upon each other. Coffee shared before the garage opened, lunches eaten on the back steps in silence. Evenings spent watching Haley chase the barn cat through the tall grass. Theirs was a partnership not sealed in ink or speeches, but in the soft repetition of doing life together. But kindness has its enemies. Not everyone in Hollow Creek was pleased. Some muttered that the garage undercut local mechanics, even though the few had offered affordable services in years. Others whispered that Jacob had sold himself out, let a rich woman pull him from the mud only to parade him around like a mascot. The fact that he'd stayed with her through the rumors, through the slander, was seen by some not as loyalty, but weakness. And still others, those too broken to accept the idea of healing, resented the existence of a place that promised it. The warnings started again. This time they were louder. Spray paint appeared one morning across the side of the barn. Fraud, beggar, stay out. Jacob stood staring at the words, hands clenched at his sides. Alisa arrived minutes later, breath catching in her throat when she saw them. He didn't look at her. He just fetched a bucket, filled it with soapy water, and began scrubbing. The sheriff came, of course, took photos again, promised again. But this time, when he said, "Don't stir things up," Jacob didn't nod. He stared at the man, voice calm but hard. Someone already did. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay on the couch, Haley snuggled beside him, while the sound of wind battered the windows. His mind spun, not with fear, but with fury. Not for himself, for her, for Haley, for everyone who walked through those doors seeking help and left better than they came. He had built something sacred, and they wanted to soil it. 2 days passed, then 3. Alesa didn't bring it up again, and neither did he. But something shifted in the way he moved. His eyes held more shadow. His shoulders carried something heavier than torque wrenches and socket sets. And then she disappeared again. It started with a missed call, then 2. Her assistant answered texts with brief, polite replies. She's handling a board matter. She'll be in touch. Jacob knew the pattern. He'd lived it once already, but this time it felt different. This time it felt final. He waited a week before going to the ranch house. It was dark, curtains drawn, the porch swing still. A note on the door read, "Away on business." He didn't knock. He didn't call again. He went back to the barn and worked, but the light had dimmed. Word traveled fast. The local paper ran a piece titled, "A Row Retreat?" Sources confirm internal conflict within philanthropic initiative. They didn't mention the garage, but they didn't have to. The message was clear. The queen had stepped back. The pawn was left behind. That night, Haley asked again, "Why are people being mean?" He held her close, but said nothing. The following day, another man rolled into the garage, young, nervous, engine sputtering. When Jacob told him the repair would be free, he broke down crying, said he hadn't expected anything good anymore. Jacob fixed the car. Then he stood in the middle of the shop, staring at the stained concrete beneath his feet. It wasn't about Alesa. Not anymore. It was about what they had built. The next morning, he opened the doors again, then again, and again, but his eyes still searched the road. Then came the last knock. Late evening, Haley already asleep. Rain beginning to fall. He opened the door expecting wind, and there she was. No SUV, no press, no entourage. Just Alesa, drenched again, holding nothing this time but her breath. He stared, unsure if she was real. "I came back," she said. "I thought you left." "I did," she admitted, "but not for long. I just needed to burn the last bridge behind me." She stepped forward. "I bought out the rest of the board, all of it. The foundation is ours now, the garage, the land, no shareholders, no corporate mouths to feed." He blinked. "You walked away?" She nodded. "I didn't walk. I ran. Right back here." She reached into her coat, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. It was the deed, signed, final. "Now it's yours," she said. He took it slowly. "And if I screw it up?" he asked. She smiled. "Then we fix it, together." He didn't speak. He just pulled her in. No one spoke of the past again. Months passed. The garage flourished. Donations trickled in unsolicited. Volunteers arrived. Veterans who hadn't held a wrench in years. Teens who needed second chances. Farmers who brought eggs and tomatoes in lieu of payment. No one was turned away. Ever. Haley painted new murals. Dragons, of course, and above the counter, in bold letters, they added a final phrase. "Kindness is always paid in full." If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more like it. Check out the next video for another powerful journey, and share this one with someone who needs to hear it.